Two identical twin boys disappeared while playing in their fenced backyard in suburban Denver in 1991, leaving behind only an overturned sandbox and their mother's shattered heart. For 19 years, Margaret Chen believed her sons had been taken by a stranger who somehow scaled their 6-foot privacy fence. But when she spots a familiar birthmark in a high school teacher's family photo during a parent-teacher conference, the truth that emerges is more devastating than anything she could have imagined. A revelation that would expose how the person she trusted most had been hiding in plain sight all along. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup in the conference room of Westfield High School, the ceramic making a soft clink against the wooden table. At 52, she had learned to manage these moments of unexpected emotion, the sudden surges of grief that could still catch her off guard after nearly 2 decades. Today was supposed to be routine, just another parent-teacher conference for her daughter Emma, but something about being in a school always brought back memories of what her twin boys never got to experience. "Mrs. Chen, thank you for coming," said Mr. So. David Brennan, Emma's AP history teacher, as he settled into the chair across from her. He was younger than most of the faculty, perhaps early 30s, with sandy brown hair and an easy smile that had made him popular among students. Emma spoke highly of him, said he made history come alive in ways other teachers couldn't. "Emma is doing wonderfully in class. Her essay on the civil rights movement was particularly insightful." Margaret forced herself to focus on the present, on the daughter she still had, pushing away thoughts of the sons she'd lost. "She loves your class," she managed, her voice steady despite the tightness in her throat. "Says you're the best teacher she's had." Mr. Brennan's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "That means a lot. Teaching is a family tradition for us. My mother was a teacher. My wife teaches elementary school. And even my boys are talking about following in our footsteps." He reached for a frame on his desk, turning it toward Margaret. "This is from last summer's vacation. My family's everything to me." Margaret glanced at the photo politely, prepared to make the appropriate comments about what a lovely family he had. The image showed Mr. Brennan with a blonde woman and 2 teenage boys on a beach, all 4 of them grinning at the camera with the ocean sparkling behind them. She was about to look away when something made her pause. The boys were clearly twins, perhaps 16 or 17, with the same dark hair and angular features. But it wasn't their appearance that made her breath catch. It was the small, distinctive birthmark visible on the left twin's neck, just below his ear. Time seemed to slow as Margaret stared at the photograph, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. That birthmark, shaped like a crescent moon with a small star-shaped mark beside it. She had kissed it goodnight thousands of times, had traced its outline with her finger while her baby boy giggled. Nathan's birthmark. Her Nathan. "Mrs. Chen?" Mr. Brennan's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" Margaret's gaze snapped up to meet his, and for the first time she really looked at him. The shape of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. How had she not seen it before? But no, it couldn't be. Her ex-husband was serving life in prison for the boy's abduction and suspected murder. The investigation had been thorough. They'd found evidence. He'd eventually confessed, though the bodies were never recovered. Margaret's voice failed her. She reached for the photo frame with shaking hands. "Your sons. How old are they?" 17, Mr. Brennan replied, his brow furrowing with concern. "They'll be 19 in August. Twins run in my wife's family. We were blessed with 2 at once." He laughed, but it sounded forced now, his eyes watching her carefully. "Mrs. Chen, you look pale. Should I get you some water?" 19 in August. Nathan and Ryan would have been 19 in August. Margaret's finger traced the birthmark in the photo, her touch so light it barely disturbed the dust on the glass. "Where did you adopt them from?" The question hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Mr. Brennan went very still, his friendly demeanor evaporating like morning mist. "I'm sorry, your sons," Margaret said, her voice stronger now, fueled by a mother's instinct that had never truly died. "Where did you adopt them from?" "They're not adopted." His voice had gone flat, defensive. "Mrs. Chen, I think perhaps we should reschedule this conference. You seem upset." "That birthmark," Margaret interrupted, pointing at the photo with a finger that no longer shook. "My son Nathan had that exact birthmark, born with it. The doctors said they'd never seen one quite like it. The moon shape with the little star beside it. Said it was 1 in a million." Mr. Brennan stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I think you're confused. Lots of people have birthmarks. Show me their birth certificates." The words came out as a command, not a request. Margaret stood too, her 5'4" frame suddenly feeling taller, stronger. If they're your biological sons, you'll have birth certificates, hospital records, baby photos from when they were born. This is inappropriate, Mr. Brennan said, moving toward the door. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. But Margaret was already pulling out her phone, her fingers flying over the screen. She'd kept everything digitized. Every photo, every document, every piece of her boys. Within seconds, she had the image pulled up. Nathan and Ryan at 5 years old, the last photo taken before they vanished. She thrust the phone at Mr. Brennan. Look at them. Look at their faces and tell me those aren't the same boys in your photo. He glanced at the screen and Margaret saw it. The flash of recognition, quickly suppressed. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Lots of kids look alike. The scar on Ryan's chin from when he fell off his bike. Margaret continued, her voice rising. Nathan's birthmark. The way Ryan's left ear sticks out just a little more than his right. The way Nathan squints his left eye when he smiles. It's all there in your photo. Those are my sons. You're grieving, Mr. Brennan said, but his voice had lost its conviction. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. I understand you lost your children, but call your wife. Margaret stepped between him and the door. Call her right now and ask her to describe giving birth to those boys. Ask her what hospital they were born in, what doctor delivered them. Call her. His hand moved reflexively toward his pocket, then stopped. This is harassment. I'll call security. Call them, Margaret said. Call security. Call the police. Call anyone you want. Because I'm not leaving until you explain how you have my sons. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the small conference room. Margaret could hear the muffled sounds of the school beyond the door, lockers slamming, students laughing, the normal life that had continued while hers had stopped 19 years ago. When Mr. Brennan finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You don't understand, he said. They're happy. They have a good life. They're about to graduate, go to college. Why would you want to destroy that? The confession hung between them like a physical thing. Margaret felt her knees go weak, but she forced herself to remain standing. They're alive. The words came out as a broken whisper. My boys are alive. Mr. Brennan, or whatever his real name was, sank into a chair, his head in his hands. They don't remember you. They were so young. They don't remember any of it. What did you do? Margaret's voice was deadly quiet now. How did you take them? Why? He looked up at her and she saw tears in his eyes. I didn't take them. I saved them. Saved them? The words made no sense. From what? From their own backyard? From their mother who loved them more than life itself? From him, Mr. Brennan said. From their father. From what he was planning to do. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. Richard is in prison. He confessed to a crime he didn't commit, Mr. Brennan interrupted. He confessed because he thought they were dead, because he thought he'd failed to protect them, because the guilt of what he'd almost allowed to happen was eating him alive. You're lying. But even as she said it, Margaret remembered the strangeness of Richard's confession, the way he'd seemed almost relieved to be arrested, the way he'd refused to fight the charges even though the evidence was largely circumstantial. Your husband wasn't the monster, Mrs. Chen, Mr. Brennan said quietly. He was trying to protect them from the real monster, from someone you both trusted, someone who had access to your home, your children, your life. Margaret's mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. Who had they trusted? Who had access? The babysitter had been thoroughly investigated. The neighbors had all been cleared, unless, oh God, she breathed, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Denise. Mr. Brennan nodded slowly. Your sister-in-law, Richard's sister. She was involved with some very dangerous people, owed them money, a lot of money, and they had specific interests in children, particularly twins. Margaret had to grab the edge of the table to steady herself. Denise, who had been like a sister to her. Denise, who had helped plan the boys' birthday parties and babysat them countless times. Denise, who had supposedly been at work when the boys vanished, but whose alibi had been confirmed by a single co-worker who barely knew her. Richard found out what she was planning, Mr. Brennan continued. The people she owed, they ran a trafficking ring, specialized in selling children to wealthy buyers overseas. Twins were especially valuable. Richard came to me because I was a private investigator then, hired me to watch the boys, to gather evidence. But we ran out of time. You took them, Margaret said, the pieces falling into place. You took them before she could. The plan was to make it look like a stranger abduction, to keep them safe while we built the case against Denise and her associates. But then she turned it around on Richard, planted evidence, made it look like he was the one who'd taken them. And when he realized the boys were safer if everyone thought they were dead, he confessed. 19 years, Margaret whispered. You kept them for 19 years. My wife and I couldn't have children, Mr. Brennan said. We were already approved for adoption. The plan was temporary, just until it was safe. But weeks turned to months, months to years. The boys were happy. They were thriving. And Denise, she died in a car accident 3 years later. Single car, drove off a cliff. Some say it wasn't an accident. And Richard rotted in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He made that choice, to protect them. He knew that as long as everyone believed the boys were dead, no one would look for them. They'd be safe. Margaret stared at him, fury and grief and hope all warring in her chest. You stole 19 years from me, from them, from all of us. I gave them a life, Mr. Brennan said. A normal, happy life. They play soccer, they have friends, they're going to good colleges. Nathan wants to be a doctor. Ryan's interested in engineering. They're good kids, Mrs. Chen. Happy kids. With stolen lives, Margaret shot back. Built on lies. Built on love, he countered. My wife and I love them like our own. We are their parents in every way that matters. Except legally, except morally, except truthfully. Mr. Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a worn envelope. Richard gave me this, before he confessed. Asked me to give it to you when the boys were safe. I've carried it for 19 years, waiting for the right moment. I guess this is it. Margaret took the envelope with trembling hands. Her name was written on the front in Richard's careful script. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the ink faded but still legible. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then our boys are safe, and enough time has passed that the danger is over. I know you'll never forgive me for the choice I made, for the years I've stolen from you. But please know that everything I did was to protect them, and to protect you from the truth about Denise. The man who has our sons is a good man. He'll raise them well, love them as we would. I've made him promise to tell you the truth when it's safe. If that time has come, please don't hate him. He saved our boys when I couldn't. I think of you every day. I dream of the four of us together again, but I know that's a dream that will never come true. Take comfort in knowing our boys are alive, are happy, are loved. That's all I ever wanted for them. All my love, always. Richard. Margaret read the letter 3 times before the tears made it impossible to see. When she looked up, Mr. Brennan was watching her with a mixture of sympathy and fear. What happens now? He asked quietly. It was the question Margaret had been asking herself for 19 years, though in a different context. What happens now that I know they're alive? What happens now that the truth is out? What happens to the boys who don't remember me? To the only parents they've known? To the lie that saved their lives? I want to see them, she said finally. Not to tell them. Not yet, but I need to see them. Mr. Brennan hesitated, then nodded slowly. There's a soccer game tomorrow. Ryan's team is playing at the field behind the school. Nathan always comes to watch. You could see them there, from a distance. And then we figure out what's best for them, he said. They're not 5 anymore, Mrs. Chen. They're young men. They deserve to know the truth, but they also deserve to have it revealed in a way that won't destroy their lives. Margaret wanted to argue, wanted to demand her sons back immediately, wanted to call the police and have this man arrested for kidnapping. But the mother in her, the part that had always put her boys' well-being first, knew he was right. Whatever happened next had to be about Nathan and Ryan, not about her pain or her rights or even justice. The soccer game, she said. What time? 2 o'clock. She nodded, standing on legs that felt like water. I'll be there. And Mr. Brennan? We will tell them. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but soon. They deserve to know who they really are. I know, he said quietly. I've always known this day would come. Part of me is relieved it's finally here. Margaret picked up the photo from his desk, studying her boys' faces one more time. They looked happy. God help her. They looked happy and healthy and loved. Can I? She stopped, hating herself for having to ask. Can I have a copy of this? Without a word, Mr. Brennan opened his laptop and printed out a copy from his digital files. As the printer hummed, they stood in awkward silence. 2 people bound together by an impossible secret. Their favorite foods, Margaret said suddenly. Do they still like peanut butter and banana sandwiches? Nathan used to ask for them every day. A small smile crossed Mr. Brennan's face. Nathan still does. Drives Ryan crazy. Ryan's more into pizza now, everything pizza. Nathan was always the pickier eater, Margaret said, her voice thick with unshed tears. Ryan would eat anything as long as it wasn't vegetables. Still true, Mr. Brennan confirmed. We have to hide vegetables in his food. My wife makes these meatballs with pureed carrots and spinach mixed in. He has no idea. It was surreal, discussing her son's eating habits with their kidnapper. Yet Margaret found herself hungry for every detail, every small piece of the 19 years she'd missed. Are they kind? She asked. Are they good to each other? They're best friends, Mr. Brennan said. They fight sometimes, like all brothers, but they're fiercely protective of each other. Last year, some kid was bullying Ryan at school. Nathan found out and, well, let's just say it didn't happen again. Nathan was always the protector, Margaret murmured. Even at 5, he'd stand up for Ryan. The printer finished, and Mr. Brennan handed her the photo. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Margaret fought the urge to recoil. This man had saved her sons and stolen them in the same action. How was she supposed to reconcile that? I should go, she said, clutching the photo to her chest. Emma will be wondering where I am. Mrs. Chen, Mr. Brennan called as she reached the door. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not for saving them, but for the pain it caused you. There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't think about you, about what you must be going through. Margaret turned back to face him. Don't, she said quietly. Don't ask for my forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever. You gave them life, but you stole mine. You saved them from one monster, but became another kind yourself. Living with that is your burden to bear, not mine to absolve. She left then, walking through the halls of the high school on unsteady legs. Students streamed around her, chattering about tests and parties and all the normal concerns of teenage life. Tomorrow, she would see her boys among them. Tomorrow, she would watch them play soccer and laugh with their friends and live the lives she'd dreamed for them, even if she hadn't been part of making those dreams come true. Emma was waiting by the car, her face creased with concern. Mom, how did it go? You were in there forever. Margaret looked at her daughter, her 16-year-old daughter who'd been born 3 years after the twins vanished, her miracle baby who'd helped her survive the darkest period of her life. How could she explain that Emma's brothers were alive, that they'd been living just across town this whole time, that her favorite teacher was actually their kidnapper savior? It went fine, she said, unlocking the car. Mr. Brennan says you're doing well. Emma studied her mother's face as they got in the car. You've been crying. Just remembering, Margaret said, which wasn't entirely a lie. Sometimes being in schools makes me think about your brothers. Emma reached over and squeezed her mother's hand. She'd grown up in the shadow of her missing siblings, had learned to navigate the minefield of her mother's grief. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. As Margaret drove home, the photo tucked safely in her purse, she thought about Richard in his prison cell. Did he know what Mr. Brennan looked like now? Did he know the boys were happy? She'd visited him faithfully for the first 5 years, then sporadically after Emma was born, then not at all once their divorce was finalized. The last time she'd seen him was 8 years ago, and he'd looked like a ghost of himself. Thin, gray, hollowed out by guilt and sacrifice. She'd hated him for so long, hated him for taking her boys, for destroying their family, for choosing confession over fighting for his innocence. Now she understood that his confession had been the ultimate act of love, a father falling on his sword to protect his children from a danger she hadn't even known existed. That night, Margaret sat at her computer and pulled up every piece of information she could find about David Brennan. He'd appeared in town 14 years ago with his wife and 5-year-old twins, claiming to have moved from Oregon for a fresh start. His credentials were solid, his background clean. Too clean, she realized now. Someone had helped him create new identities, forge documents, build a bulletproof history. She found the boys easily enough on social media. Nathan went by Nate now, and his profile was full of photos from science competitions and volunteer work at the local hospital. Ryan's page showcased soccer victories and pictures with friends, his smile exactly the same as it had been at 5. They both listed David and Sarah Brennan as their parents, spoke lovingly of family vacations and Sunday dinners and all the normal things she'd dreamed of giving them. It would have been easier if they'd looked miserable, if she could have pointed to clear signs of abuse or neglect or unhappiness. But the truth was harder to bear. They'd thrived without her. They'd grown into impressive young men with bright futures, and they'd done it calling another woman Mom. Margaret closed the laptop and went to the kitchen. Pouring herself a glass of wine she knew she wouldn't drink. The house felt too quiet, even with Emma upstairs doing homework. For 19 years, the silence had been a reminder of absence. Now it was a reminder of presence. Her boys were out there, alive, probably doing homework of their own. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I know you have questions. If you want to know more about what happened, about why Richard made the choice he did, I can tell you, but not over the phone. Too dangerous even now. Meet me tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., the coffee shop on Morrison Street. Come alone. A friend Margaret stared at the message, her heart racing. Someone else knew, someone else had been involved. Was it safe to meet them? But then again, what was safety anymore? She'd lived 19 years in a safe lie. Maybe it was time for the dangerous truth. She texted back a single word, yes. The next morning, Margaret arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, choosing a corner booth with clear sightlines to both entrances. She'd barely slept, her mind churning with questions and possibilities. Who was this friend? What more was there to know? At exactly 8 o'clock, a woman entered the shop. She was in her 70s, well-dressed, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. Margaret recognized her immediately. Judge Patricia Hornby, who'd presided over Richard's trial, the judge who'd sentenced him to life in prison. Judge Hornby slid into the booth across from Margaret, her face grave. Mrs. Chen, I've waited a long time to have this conversation. You knew, Margaret said. It wasn't a question. I knew, the judge confirmed. Richard told me everything the night before his sentencing, showed me proof, made me promise to uphold the conviction for the boys' safety. You sent an innocent man to prison. I upheld justice in the only way that mattered, by keeping 2 children safe from a trafficking ring that had judges, police officers, and politicians in its pocket. Do you know how many children disappeared in the late 80s and early 90s? How many were never found? Margaret shook her head, overwhelmed. Hundreds, Judge Hornby said. Denise and her associates were part of something much bigger. Richard uncovered it by accident when he started noticing strange men photographing the boys at the park, at school events. He hired David, though that wasn't his name then, to investigate. What they found was a nightmare. Tell me everything, Margaret said. For the next hour, Judge Hornby laid out the truth Richard had discovered, the trafficking ring that operated across state lines, the powerful people involved, the specific order that had been placed for identical twin boys, the plan to take Nathan and Ryan during a family camping trip that had been scheduled for the week after they vanished. David acted on his own when he took them, the judge explained. Richard was still trying to gather enough evidence to take to the FBI, but David had seen what happened to other children who'd been taken. He couldn't wait. And Denise cooperated fully with the ring until she realized Richard knew. Then she turned the tables, planted evidence, made him look guilty. She was brilliant, I'll give her that. Evil, but brilliant. Her car accident was no accident, Judge Hornby confirmed. The ring doesn't tolerate loose ends. Once Richard was in prison and the boys were presumed dead, she became a liability. Margaret felt sick. All these years, she'd mourned her sons and hated her husband, never knowing the horror that had been circling their family like sharks. There's more, Judge Hornby said gently. Richard is sick. Cancer, he's been refusing treatment. The prison contacted me as his emergency contact. He never changed it from the trial. He doesn't have long. The coffee shop seemed to spin around Margaret. How long? Weeks, maybe a month or 2 at most. He needs to see them, Margaret said immediately. The boys. Before. That's why I'm here, Judge Hornby said. To help facilitate that if you're willing. If you think it's the right thing to do. Margaret thought about the letter Richard had written. About 19 years of sacrifice. About dying alone in a cell for a crime he didn't commit. Yes, she said. But first, I need to see them play soccer. 2 o'clock. Found Margaret sitting in her car at the edge of the school's soccer field, watching warm-ups through binoculars she'd bought that morning. She felt ridiculous, like a stalker, but she couldn't help herself. She needed this moment to see them before everything changed. Ryan was easy to spot, the star player moving across the field with natural grace. He'd gotten his athletic ability from Richard, who'd played college football. Nathan sat in the bleachers with what must be Sarah Brennan, the woman who'd raised them. They were laughing at something on his phone. and the easy affection between them made Margaret's chest tight with a combination of gratitude and jealousy. The game began, and Margaret found herself caught up in it despite everything. Ryan was magnificent, scoring 2 goals in the first half. After each one, he'd point to Nathan in the stands, and Nathan would whoop and cheer. Brothers, still best friends, just like Mr. Brennan had said. At halftime, Nathan jogged down to the field to bring Ryan water. Margaret watched them through the binoculars, studying every gesture, every expression. They were taller than Richard, but they had his smile. They had her eyes, though, and her stubborn chin. They were perfect. "Beautiful boys," a voice said beside her car. Margaret jumped, dropping the binoculars. A woman stood beside her window, Sarah Brennan. Up close, she looked tired, worn down by nearly 2 decades of carrying a terrible secret. "David told me," Sarah said simply, "about yesterday, about you. I thought you might be here." Margaret's first instinct was anger, but it died when she saw the tears in Sarah's eyes. This woman had loved her boys for 19 years, had raised them, worried over them, celebrated their victories, and comforted their defeats. She was their mother in every way that mattered, even if she wasn't their mother by birth. "Thank you," Margaret said, the words sticking in her throat, "for loving them." Sarah's composure cracked. "I'm so sorry. We never meant for it to go on so long. At first we were just keeping them safe. Then a year passed, then 2, and they were calling us Mom and Dad, and we couldn't. I couldn't." "I know," Margaret said, and surprisingly, she did know. If the situation had been reversed, if she'd been raising 2 boys who'd come to her for safety, could she have given them up? "But we have to tell them now. They deserve the truth." "I know," Sarah whispered. "David and I talked all night. We've always known this day would come. We've tried to raise them to be strong enough to handle it." They stood together, 2 mothers watching their sons, as Ryan's team took the field for the second half. It was surreal and heartbreaking, and somehow exactly right. "There's something else," Margaret said, making a decision. "Their father, their biological father, is dying. He's in prison for their kidnapping, a crime he didn't commit. He sacrificed everything to keep them safe. They need to know that. They need a chance to meet him before it's too late." Sarah's face went pale. "Prison, but how would we explain?" "With the truth," Margaret said firmly. "All of it. They're 17. They're strong, like you said. They can handle it." The game ended with Ryan's team winning 4-2. Margaret watched her sons celebrate with their teammates, memorizing every moment. Tomorrow or the next day or next week, their lives would be turned upside down. But today, they were just 2 happy teenagers celebrating a soccer victory. "When?" Sarah asked quietly. "Soon," Margaret said. "We'll need to coordinate with David, with the authorities, and I want Emma there when we tell them. They should know they have a sister." Sarah nodded. "They'll love her. They've always wanted a sibling." The irony of that statement hung between them. The boys had always had siblings, each other and Emma. They just hadn't known about one of them. As the crowd began to disperse, Margaret started her car. "We'll figure this out," she said to Sarah. "For them, we'll find a way to make this work. 4 parents who love them," Sarah said with a watery smile. "I guess there are worse things." Margaret drove away, leaving Sarah to collect her sons, their sons, from the field. In her rearview mirror, she saw Nathan throw his arm around Ryan's shoulders. Saw Sarah hug them both. A family. Not the family she'd imagined, but a family nonetheless. That evening, Margaret sat down with Emma and told her everything. Her daughter listened in stunned silence, processing the reality that her missing brothers had been alive all along, that they'd been living just a few miles away, that her favorite teacher was somehow both their kidnapper and their savior. "This is insane," Emma said when Margaret finished. "Like, completely insane. My brothers are alive, and they go to Westfield? I've probably passed them in the halls. I know it's a lot to process." "A lot?" Emma laughed, but it had a hysterical edge. "Mom, this is like something out of a movie. My dad's in prison for a crime he didn't commit. My aunt was planning to sell my brothers. They've been raised by my history teacher. This is beyond a lot." Margaret pulled her daughter into a hug. "I know, baby. I know. But we're going to handle this together, okay? As a family." "What if they don't want us?" Emma asked in a small voice. "What if they're happy with their fake family and don't want their real one?" It was the fear Margaret had been pushing down all day. "Then we respect their choice," she said, though the words felt like glass in her throat. "But we give them the chance to make that choice with all the information. They deserve to know where they came from, who they are." "And Dad?" Emma asked. "Are you really going to take them to see Dad?" Margaret had been thinking about Richard all day, about the man she'd fallen in love with in college, the father who'd read bedtime stories with different voices for each character, the husband who'd apparently loved his family enough to give up everything to protect them. "Yes," she said, "he deserves to see them, and they deserve to know what he sacrificed for them." The next few days passed in a blur of lawyers and meetings. David Brennan hired an attorney immediately, prepared to face charges for kidnapping, identity fraud, and a host of other crimes. But the more the authorities dug into the case, the more complicated it became. Evidence of the trafficking ring emerged, supporting David's claims. Several other children who'd gone missing during the same period were potentially linked to the same organization. Judge Hornby used her connections to arrange a meeting at the prison. They would tell the boys the truth first, give them time to process it, and then, if they were willing, take them to see Richard. The meeting was set for Saturday morning at the Brennan house. Margaret arrived with Emma and their lawyer. Her hands shook as she rang the doorbell of the modest two-story home where her boys had grown up without her. David answered, looking haggard. "They're in the living room," he said quietly. "We told them there was something important we needed to discuss. They know something's wrong." Margaret followed him inside, Emma close behind her. The house was warm and lived in, with photos covering every surface. Her boys at every age she'd missed. First days of school, Halloween costumes, Christmas mornings, birthday parties. A lifetime documented without her. Nathan and Ryan sat on the couch, confusion and worry clear on their faces. They looked up as Margaret entered, and she saw the moment of recognition, not of her, but of Emma. "Emma," Ryan said, "what are you doing here?" Before anyone could answer, Nathan's gaze fell on Margaret. Her eyes, widened slightly. "You look familiar. Have we met?" Margaret's throat closed up. Sarah stepped forward, her own tears already falling. "Boys, there's something we need to tell you. Something we should have told you a long time ago." What followed was the hardest hour of Margaret's life. David and Sarah laid out the truth piece by piece, starting with their real names, their real birth date, their real parents. The boys' expressions went from confusion to disbelief to anger to devastation as the story unfolded. "You're lying," Ryan said at one point, standing abruptly. "This is insane. You're our parents. We've always been Brennans. This woman is she's just..." But Nathan was staring at Margaret with an expression of dawning horror. "The dreams," he whispered. "I've always had these dreams about a woman singing to me, a song about mockingbirds, and a kitchen with yellow walls." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "I painted the kitchen yellow when you were 4, she said, "and I sang you Hush Little Baby every night. You called it the Mockingbird Song." "No," Ryan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No, this isn't real. This can't be real." David pulled out a folder of documents, birth certificates, hospital records, photos from their early childhood. "Your names were Nathan Chen and Ryan Chen. You were born on August 15, 1991. You lived at 451 Maple Street until October 12, 1996, when you disappeared from your backyard." Nathan took the photos with trembling hands. They showed 2 identical boys with a young couple, Margaret and Richard. Birthday parties, trips to the zoo, playing in a sandbox. The same sandbox he'd dreamed about for years, never understanding why it felt so real. "If this is true," Ryan said, his voice cracking, "if we were kidnapped, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you give us back?" Sarah was sobbing now. "We were protecting you. There were bad people who wanted to hurt you. Your father, your biological father, discovered a trafficking ring. They were going to take you, sell you. David saved you. By kidnapping us himself." Nathan's voice was rising. "By letting our real parents think we were dead?" "Your father knew," David said quietly. "Richard knew you were safe. He went to prison to protect you, to maintain the lie that kept you hidden." "Prison?" Both boys spoke in unison, their faces matching masks of shock. Margaret stepped forward for the first time. "He's there now. Has been for 19 years. And he's dying. Cancer. He doesn't have long." The room fell silent except for Sarah's quiet sobs. Ryan sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. Nathan still clutched the photos, staring at images of a life he couldn't remember. "This is Emma," Margaret said softly, pulling her daughter forward. "She's your sister. She was born 3 years after you disappeared." Emma gave a small wave, tears streaming down her face. "Hi," she said. "I've grown up knowing about you. Mom never stopped looking for you, not ever. A sister, Ryan said faintly. We have a sister. You have a family, Margaret said. A complicated, messy, broken family, but a family that has loved you every single day for 19 years. All of us. Nathan looked up at her, and she saw 5-year-old Nathan in his eyes, confused and scared and looking for comfort. I don't remember you, he said, his voice breaking. I should remember my own mother, but I don't. You were so young, Margaret said, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to pull him into her arms. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. What happens now? Ryan asked. Are you going to have them arrested? He gestured at David and Sarah. Are you taking us away? No, Margaret said firmly. David and Sarah raised you. They love you. They're your parents too. We're going to figure this out together as an extended family, if that's what you want. And if we don't want any of this? Nathan asked. If we just want our lives to go back to normal? That's not possible, David said gently. I'm going to face charges. There will be media attention. Your friends will find out. Normal is gone, boys. I'm so sorry, but normal is gone. The boys exchanged a look that Margaret recognized. Twin telepathy, Richard had called it. They'd always been able to communicate without words. We need time, Ryan said finally. This is too much. Of course, Margaret said. Take all the time you need, but there is one thing that can't wait. She took a deep breath. Your father, Richard, he really doesn't have long. If you want to meet him, to hear his side of the story, it needs to be soon. The man who went to prison for kidnapping us wants to see us? Nathan's voice was flat. The man who gave up his freedom to keep you safe wants to see his sons one last time, Margaret corrected. But only if you're willing. Another silent exchange between the twins. Then Nathan nodded slowly. We'll go. We need to hear it from him. We need to understand why. The rest of the meeting was logistics. When to go to the prison, what to expect, how to handle the emotional aftermath. Through it all, Margaret watched her sons, cataloging every gesture, every expression. They were strangers to her, but strangers built from her DNA, carrying pieces of her and Richard in every cell. As they prepared to leave, Emma approached the boys hesitantly. I know this is weird, she said, but I've wanted brothers my whole life. And finding out you're not just alive, but you're like these amazing guys who everyone at school likes. It's kinda cool. When you're ready, if you want, maybe we could hang out? Ryan managed a small smile. Our sister goes to Westfield? Junior year, Emma confirmed. I've probably cheered for you at soccer games without knowing it. That's so weird, Nathan said, but there was wonder in his voice too. A sister. The prison visit was arranged for 3 days later. Margaret spent those days in a haze of preparation and worry. She'd spoken to Richard's lawyer, who'd confirmed the terminal diagnosis. She'd also learned that Richard had refused all visitors for the past 5 years, accepting only written correspondence from David, brief updates about the boys' lives that he'd treasured like lifelines. The morning of the visit, Margaret picked up the boys from the Brennan house. They were dressed neatly but simply, their faces pale with nerves. They climbed into her car silently, sitting together in the back like the children they'd once been. Thank you for doing this, Margaret said as she drove. I know it's hard. He's our father, Nathan said simply. We have to. The prison was a 2-hour drive. Margaret filled the silence with stories about Richard, how they'd met, what he'd been like as a young father, his dreams for his boys. She told them about his love of baseball, his terrible dad jokes, the way he'd insisted on checking under their beds for monsters every night even though they weren't scared. He sounds nice, Ryan said quietly. Different from how I imagined a kidnapper. Because he wasn't one, Margaret said. He was a father who discovered his children were in danger and did everything he could to protect them. They were processed through security. The boys wide-eyed at the harsh reality of the prison. Finally, they were led to a private visitation room. Margaret had pulled strings to avoid the general visiting area. This reunion didn't need an audience. Richard was brought in, and Margaret had to stifle a gasp. He was skeletal, his skin gray, his once thick hair completely gone. But his eyes were the same, and they filled with tears the moment he saw his sons. My boys, he whispered. My beautiful boys. Nathan and Ryan stood frozen, clearly shocked by his appearance. Margaret gently guided them to sit across from their father. I'm sorry, Richard said, his voice stronger now. I'm so sorry for everything, for the lies, for the years stolen, for not being there. but I need you to know that every single day in here has been worth it knowing you were safe." "Tell us," Nathan said. "Tell us everything. We need to understand." So Richard told them about discovering Denise's connections to the trafficking ring through his work, investigating missing children cases, about the photos he'd found of them in her apartment, marked with prices, about hiring David to investigate, and the horror they'd uncovered, a network that sold children to the highest bidder, with law enforcement and judicial connections that made going to the police dangerous. "The night David took you, Denise was supposed to be watching you the next day," Richard said. "She'd told the buyers she could deliver twin boys within the week. We were out of time, so you let him take us," Ryan said. "I was supposed to meet him to get you to safety together, but Denise must have suspected something. She called the police, said she'd seen me acting strangely around you. By the time I got home, you were gone and the police were there with a search warrant. The evidence they found," Margaret prompted, "was planted by Denise. Photos on my computer, searches for how to dispose of bodies. She was thorough." Richard's voice was bitter, "But she made one mistake. She didn't know David had already taken you. She thought I'd hidden you somewhere, that I'd break and tell her where so she could complete her deal." "Why didn't you fight?" Nathan demanded. "Why didn't you tell the truth?" "Because the truth would have exposed David, would have put you back in danger. The ring was still active, still looking for you. As long as everyone thought you were dead, you were safe." 19 years, Ryan said. "You've been in here 19 years. And I'd do 19 more if it meant keeping you safe." Richard said simply, "You're my sons. Protecting you is my job, even if it meant doing it from in here." The boys were crying now, silent tears rolling down their faces. Nathan reached across the table and Richard gripped his hand like a lifeline. "I don't remember much," Nathan said. "But I remember you reading to us. Something about a monster at the end of the book?" Richard's face lit up. "Grover, the monster at the end of this book. You loved that one. Made me read it every night for months." "I remember your laugh," Ryan said suddenly. "Big and loud. Mom, Sarah, always said I laughed just like my grandfather, but I knew that wasn't right." "You have my laugh," Richard confirmed, "and my stubborn streak from what David's letters told me. I know you play soccer. I know Nathan wants to be a doctor. I know you're both brilliant and kind and everything I dreamed you'd be." They talked for an hour, sharing memories and filling in gaps. Richard told them about their grandparents, who'd passed away believing their grandsons were dead. The boys told him about their lives, their friends, their dreams for the future. Finally, the guard indicated their time was up. Richard struggled to his feet, and Margaret saw how much effort it cost him. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I don't expect you to think of me as your father. David earned that title. But I need you to know that loving you, protecting you, was the greatest privilege of my life." "Dad," Nathan said, testing the word, "we'll come back if you want us to." Richard's composure finally broke entirely. "I want that more than anything in the world." They said their goodbyes, and Margaret watched her sons embrace their father for the first time in 19 years. It was brief, awkward, but it was a start. The drive home was silent for the first half hour. Then Ryan spoke. "He's really dying." "Yes," Margaret said. "How long?" "The doctors say weeks, maybe a month or two if he's lucky." "We need to see him again," Nathan said. "Soon and often. We've already lost 19 years. Margaret felt a flutter of hope. "I can arrange that, as often as you want." "And after?" Ryan asked. "When he's gone, what happens to our family then?" It was the question Margaret had been grappling with herself. How did you blend a family torn apart by noble lies and desperate choices? "We figure it out," she said, "day by day. We learn to be a family in whatever way works for us. You'll always have David and Sarah. They raised you, they love you. But you also have me and Emma, and we love you too. Maybe that's messy and complicated, but maybe that's okay. Being 4 parents," Nathan said with a small laugh. "That's going to make graduation interesting. And weddings," Ryan added. "Who walks us down the aisle?" They were joking, but Margaret heard the acceptance underneath. They were going to try. All of them were going to try to forge something new from the ashes of the past. The news broke 2 weeks later. A reporter had somehow connected the dots between David's court appearance and the old missing children's case. Kidnapped twins found after 19 years living with abductor made international headlines within hours. The family had to navigate media scrutiny while trying to build their fragile new relationships, but they faced it together. Over the next weeks, they settled into a strange routine. The boys visited Richard twice a week. with Margaret or the Brennans driving them. Emma joined them sometimes, getting to know both her brothers and the father she'd never met. They shared meals together, all 6 of them, awkward at first but gradually becoming more natural. David pled guilty to kidnapping but received a suspended sentence due to the extraordinary circumstances. During the trial, more details emerged about the trafficking ring. While Denise had died in a car accident 5 years after the boys disappeared, her former associates had continued operating. David's testimony and Richard's old case files helped authorities connect several cold cases and led to multiple arrests. Justice delayed but not denied. Richard lived longer than the doctors predicted, holding on for 4 months. Long enough to see his sons graduate high school, long enough to watch them get accepted into college. Nathan to pre-med, Ryan to engineering, just as they'd planned. Long enough to tell them he loved them 100 times. He died on a Tuesday morning in October, almost 19 years to the day after he'd last seen his boys as children. Margaret was with him, holding his hand as he took his last breath. His final words were about the boys, about how proud he was, about how it had all been worth it. The funeral was surreal. Murdered children's father dies in prison, except the children weren't murdered, and the father wasn't a killer. The boys served as pallbearers along with David and some of Richard's cousins. They buried him next to his parents with a headstone that read, "Richard Chen, beloved father." Simple words that captured the essential truth of who he'd been. After the service, the strange extended family gathered at Margaret's house. Sarah had brought food, Emma was showing the boys old photo albums, and David was helping Margaret with coffee. It wasn't normal. Nothing about their situation would ever be normal, but it was theirs. "He was a good man," David said quietly as they stood in the kitchen. "I want you to know that I never took his sacrifice lightly. Every decision I made raising the boys, I asked myself what Richard would want." Margaret looked into the living room where Nathan was teaching Emma some complicated card game, while Ryan and Sarah laughed at their competitive bickering. "You did good," she said. "They're amazing young men. Richard would be proud." "They get that from both their parents," David said. "All 4 of us." It was generous of him to include her, considering she'd missed their entire childhood. But Margaret was learning to accept grace where she found it, to build bridges instead of walls. Later, as everyone was leaving, Nathan and Ryan lingered. "Mom," Ryan said, and Margaret's heart clenched because he was talking to her, not Sarah. "We were thinking, our apartment at college has a spare room, if you wanted to visit sometimes. You and Emma, Sarah and David too. You know, to make up for lost time. I'd like that," Margaret managed through her tears. "I'd like that very much." Nathan hugged her then, really hugged her, not the careful, awkward embraces they'd shared before. "We're going to be okay," he said. "All of us. It's going to take time, but we're going to be okay." As Margaret watched them drive away, her boys, alive and whole, and beginning to find their way back to her, she believed him. They'd lost 19 years, but they had the rest of their lives to make new memories. It wasn't the family she'd planned, but it was the family she had, stitched together with love and sacrifice, and the kind of faith that could survive even the darkest nights. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Movie night Friday? I told the boys about our Marvel marathons and they want in." Margaret smiled, typing back, "Perfect. I'll make popcorn." Some stories don't have neat endings. Some families aren't built on traditional foundations. But love, real love, the kind that sacrifices everything for those we cherish, that love finds a way, even if it takes 19 years. Even if the path is through prison cells and perfect strangers who become parents and lies that save lives. Love finds a way.